minutes this evening, so Renee and Jake are here, yay. Didn't get any speeding tickets?
No,
No, good. Very good. Well, I appreciate you coming up.
I was a little anxious though.
You were anxious? Well, we were anxious too, so. Very good. Do you want to come and sit with us? We do have a spot.
Sure.
I know you're been in the line of fire with us, but that's kind of how it goes. You're safe, Jake. Jake's like, hey, this works out okay. And this is Renee Messing. What's your official title, Renee?
Partner.
I want to use your microphone. You probably have to turn it on. They're old and will be replaced. We have, by the way, gotten a grant. This is terrible. Hold it.
My name is Renee Messing. I'm a partner with Clifton Larson Allen, and I am responsible for overseeing the town's annual audit services.
As we can talk to this under budget, we are in receipt almost of a $12,000, a few odd cents grant for the to improve the audio system here at the town hall and perhaps provide video streaming so that people have more access to being involved in town meetings in the future. So we hope to get that in place as quickly as possible. So hopefully that'll make it a little easier for you, Renee. All right, we'll go to current business, discussion of possible action, public meeting, open forum discussion to update and allow input and questions from interested citizens on the status and procedure of budgeting, budget amendments, audit process, and any other financial questions. And on the agenda in this manner for a number of reasons. I guess first and foremost because we want to make sure that we are completely accessible and available to the citizenry on any questions. This is a good forum for people to be able to ask questions. Here are the questions that are asked, and perhaps that will provide information that you might not have thought to ask, or it might generate other questions based on the questions and answers that you hear tonight. Here tonight. So it's completely, obviously, unscripted. We don't know what kind of questions you're going to ask. We're hoping that we're completely prepared with whatever question it might be. We have QuickBooks open, so we can derive some information from there, but we'll be mainly talking about, the audit. In town government, we do opt to have an audit. So the firm that does our monthly financial statements, we have a gentleman that comes in and helps us once a week on that, but for the most part, the town does its own financial work. Now, that's different from the way it was before. We did not have the ability to run financial statements until the beginning of January 2011. We had an opportunity through some software that the town had purchased to cut checks and make deposits. But we had no ability to run any reports based on a general ledger, so there was no profit and loss. Really didn't know where we were. And so that we changed immediately on January 1st of 2011 so that we could run financial statements on the spot and then set up budget versus actual reports as well. We use a software program that's very well known called QuickBooks, so it's easy for us, if we have a change of staff, to have people up to speed to be able to work within that. When you have financial work to be done, and you have an audit, there needs to be separation of responsibilities between those people that do the day-to-day decision-making as far as how the accounts are going to be entered and those that audit. That was not the case in previous time. The same company that did the financial statement work, and quite frankly, they did all the financial statement work, also did the audit and also did our IT. So it wasn't a situation where there was separation of responsibilities, and the idea of having the audit is so that there's an independent study of the work that's being done. These are taxpayer money, a lot of money, obviously, almost a $3 million budget, and so we felt it was important to make that separation change. And that happened in January of 2011. That was a unanimous vote in January of 2011 to change to the firm of Clifton Gunderson. There's specialists in accounting. Not everybody does municipal work. So we were fortunate to be introduced to Renee and her firm, and we've been very pleased. This is a very, very early audit. you know, it's only the end of February, and we already have our preliminary draft. I think we were one of the first, right, to have our work done this year?
Yes.
So that was our goal, to be, you know, number one if we could, because we're trying to get the financial information obviously out to you as quickly as possible, and take pride in having it as accurate as possible. So we were glad to set up a very aggressive schedule, and the firm was very good about arranging their schedule so that they could come in and be with us. In the previous situation, the audit was done at the end of the year, so it was like October when the financial statements were issued, almost a year after the fiscal year ended. So we will have our final audit, I would say, within a month. Would that be fair?
I would say probably within a couple of weeks.
Okay, terrific. So by March 15th or so, we'll have it in. So it's a draft form at this point, and we have a draft budget amendment that's in the back that we'll be going through a little bit later. But wanted to give you some familiarity with what we're doing. We're much more involved at this point in our finances. We do a budget versus actual financial statement with each run of our invoices, so that the board members can review where we are in budget and where, after the payment of the bills that they're approving, we will be in budget related to actual. So it's been a process that we've developed those over the years and developed the process over the last 2 years, kind of going from you know, no system to this system. We also took on in 2012 doing our payroll in-house, because that provides us much more information on a direct basis in our financials as well, and provides access to for us to be able to give you direct information directly from our system versus a vendor system. So everything is integrated at this point, and our first year of issuing W-2s went well, and so we were successfully able to integrate that too. So that kind of gives you an overview of where we were and where we are, and I guess we'll start out with any questions that you have. We'd like you to come up, give your name for the clerk if you would. A little bit of exercise so we can work off those tweets.
Lorraine Britt, 3210 South Trinity Lane in the town of Waukesha. I have a question about the labeling of the columns here. Now, this would be the second category, amount increase in budget. Now, does that statement mean that the items listed here, the dollar amounts, that is not what totally it's costing? That's the amount over what was budgeted.
Well, over and under, so it depends. In the first,
Okay, well, I'm looking at the legal fees, so let's just look
that would be
at
an over. So that
Yes.
was not what was spent, but that was spent in excess of the budgeted amount.
Yes. Now, what I would like to know then, is it possible, as you look at that column, and most of them, this one seems to be pretty large, being an increase, and I'll have to say, I haven't studied the budget year by year to say, oh, I've never seen over $100,000 before increase. So what I'm wondering is, anywhere in your books, is it possible for a taxpayer resident to see who the various firms or individual attorneys, and does that include the town attorneys?
Absolutely.
Okay, would it be possible to see how much went to each firm?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we have some of that information here, but for people who want to make specific requests, and that's why we have
Yes,
the
yes.
statements in-house. We can run for the amount that's spent in legal.
Mhm.
We can drill into that particular
Yes.
total and sort it for you by who it was paid to, by
Mhm.
how much it was,
Yes.
by what time frame it was, any
Mhm.
information that you'd like. You just need to let the clerk know, and she'll
Yes.
develop a
I
report.
wonder, this might be an extra, and I'm sorry if it is, but maybe it would be possible to have what the issue was. Now, certainly for the town attorney, that's not possible. He's got a lot of issues, but,
Well, what you're saying, Lori.
so do we all.
Yes.
So, at any rate, I would kind of like to see that, seeing that it's that much over what it was planned to be, I assume.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
That's terrific. Well, we can answer all of your questions. When we developed the QuickBooks program, we included a segment called class codes. And in certain categories of our budget, we do use what's called class codes when we want to track specific expenses. So for legal, we have several of them. One is the City of Waukesha. The other is for enforcement, so if we have an ordinance for some issue, building issue. We have Fire Commission, because sometimes they use legal and we're able to track that. If we have a bigger, long-standing issue, we include that. In this case, Five Diamonds has its own class code.
Do you put down which firm it is?
Yes.
That's paid to?
All of that is in here.
Yes.
So you would
Okay.
be able to have a report by issue that you can see each check that's written to each firm and for how much in
Okay.
whatever timetable.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just to finish up, what the legal is broken into, general matters. At Mill Creek, there were some questions that we had in the Mill Creek subdivision that we separated. We've been doing some work with Morac. There was a litigation matter there. If there were any snowplow matters, we did that separately. Our initial snowplow litigation, and of course the town of Brookfield. So we use specific class codes in the areas where we have larger items that may add up so that we can track it. I mean, one of the things that we do in budgeting is to keep everything segregated in an account, but then be able to have enough information within the information there so that we can easily retrieve it. And the reason it's important for a number of reasons. First of all, for questions from our supervisors, of course, and from the public, to be able to identify how much a specific issue has cost the town. Secondly, so that we can identify how much of those, of those issues that we've now identified, are they ongoing? So that when we look at the budget process, and we start that in August of every year, that we can easily see, well, here's how much we've spent for this particular issue. Do we see that issue ongoing? Then at least we have an idea of what we've spent for that particular issue in this particular time frame, and can extrapolate that perhaps for the next year. If we know that a particular issue has been completely resolved, well, we can immediately take that, a full amount that we spent, out of any consideration for the following year. So it gives us the tool by which not only to have hands-on immediate information as to where the money is going, both for our tracking and for our constituents, but also to be able to budget with very specific information as well. And because we're entering it with this information, we never have to go back and do any other retrieval. I mean, we basically press a button. We're able to get it all out of the system immediately, and we don't have to do any further analysis because the work is done on the front end, doing the class codes on each item, and that way we don't have any issues coming back. We have that information immediately retrievable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and it sounds like a good way to deal with things. And that just caught my eye because it's so much larger than the other things, and probably ought to be paid attention to by the citizens.
Absolutely. Next question.
Jenny, are we okay?
We're good.
That was a great question. The thing that it brings out to me to bring up is that I look at this draft here, and this is a report card on your ability to budget. This does not really address what you spend on one area or another. And the thing that makes the legal fees stand out is because it was under budgeted. That's really all this says. If you take this number along with the budget number, that's how you find out how much we really spent. I mean, you could have successfully budgeted legal fees to the penny, and it wouldn't be on this report. So any number of the other things within this list could be way more of a bigger expense and way more of a place to look for savings than legal fees. Now, there aren't many, but there are departments that spend more than what we spend on legal fees. This is a report card on your budgeting. At the most recent budget hearing, every person that I can remember that spoke on legal fees spoke in favor of budgeting more money for legal fees. And we were told that this group had come to a decision, a compromise, and that was the number. But we all thought, be careful, because it'll likely be more. I don't know what it's going to be this year, but this is simply, under budgeting for legal fees. Thank you.
correct assessment and analysis. This is a identification. The budget amendment is really an identification of overages and underages. Is that a word, underages? No? Seemed sounded odd. Of how, you know, the money has come in and gone out during the course of the year. For those of you that aren't here with us each time, probably should go through the process of paying your bills. The staff receives, of course, a stack of mail every day. That mail, if it is identified as a billing, is stamped with a specific Town of Waukesha receipt stamp and dated. We then place it either for the fire chief in his mailbox, because he reviews his bills and then brings them back to us once he codes them. If they are town and not fire department specifically, then we call what code the bills. So we look at our chart of accounts, we identify what number and what category it's going to be given. Is it, you know, paying for the water that we're buying here? Is it paying for snow plowing? I mean, our financial statements all have very detailed information with very specific subcategories. And so we assign the number that is going to be assigned to. Then on Tuesday mornings, a gentleman comes in that we've hired who's a separate person because of the separation of responsibilities we need to provide. And on Tuesday mornings, he actually enters the bills. So we determine where it's going to go because we know best what category it's supposed to be in. And then he enters the information in QuickBooks and runs the report that, the check detail report. At that point, he also runs a budget to actual analysis report, which shows if those bills were paid, where we would be on the budget to actual for any category, for the entire budget actually. And so then the supervisors have an opportunity during the course of the next week or 2 weeks, depending upon when the next board meeting is going to be, to come in, review the bills, identify any that they might have questions on, ask the staff for any backup. So when they come this evening to a meeting, they're able to, you know, approve the check detail which we provide to all of you guys, how much money we're actually spending. But that's the small amount of time. The big amount of time is spent, you know, having them come through and look at each and every bill if they so choose, initial each and every bill if they so choose, so that they're familiar with every penny that goes in and goes out. That's a process that's been in place for a long time, and we've continued that process. We think it's a very good idea to give the supervisors an opportunity to look at each and every bill. Each of them has expertise in other areas and can add a different type of review depending upon what the situation is and what we're spending the money for.
Jamie, can you call out on the QuickBooks the isolated legal bills related to the town of Brookfield, please?
I have that available.
Perfect.
I anticipated a legal question, so do you have a time frame that you want? Or
2012.
2012. All right. So for all legal bills, and let me clarify that, we put, somebody have a? The sheriff? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I can't yell at you, can I?
Can you hear that way up there?
Yeah, we actually could. Well, we only have a $500 fine if it's a phone. So I guess that doesn't count, huh?
Not a phone.
No extra money for the budget there. When we put money, when we code things for legal, we include any expenses that are related to that particular legal issue. So, hey, now we get $500. Thank you for pitching in. We code anything that is related to that particular legal fight to legal. So when, Lorraine, if I may call you Lorraine,
Right.
if you are going to be reviewing this report, you will see some things in there that may be a court reporter or maps or a specialist of some kind or whatever it might be. I mean, it's all detailed in here. We put any expenses that are related to that particular fight in that area, even if it may be an engineering fee, let's say. If it's isolated for this particular event or this particular fight, it all goes into that particular legal category. So, and because we have it all segregated as to who the checks get paid to, it's very easy for us to see who actually got paid and call out specific legal fees to attorneys versus any, consultants or any periphery items that we have. So the total quote legal expense January through December 2012, we have in QuickBooks as $254,691, so call it $255,000.
But in
But
a
that-
separate category,
Oh, I'm sorry, you did ask me for town of Brookfield, didn't you? Three copies, where's my third? 1, 2, oh, thank you. City of Waukesha, general managers. Great. So I did all of it. You specifically have to have just 2012 because I have it from the beginning of time.
I have 2012.
You do? Okay, then give us 2012 because I've got it from the beginning of time.
Or just for town of Brookfield section is 131,615.28.
I'm looking at the JS Online report dated March 26th, 2012. This is the report from Mike Johnson where he announces the formal application for the incorporation. Do we have much in the way of legal expenses prior to 2012 with regard to the town of Brookfield?
Oh, sure, because this started,
In 2011, it started, they
Yeah.
made an original application in 2011, March. That application was flawed, and they had to restart the process. So there were some fees back there, but
yeah, it's, what I've got is $29,380 for 2011.
so a pretty low number for the entire year. So looking at, as Mr. Hum pointed out, that this report card here is a kind of a how did we budget, how did we drive these numbers? And at the town's budget hearing this year, I gave a presentation on our legal expenses and how we concluded to the 2013 numbers. When you look at the cost of 2012, we did not, and I'll speak for myself, I did not in any way anticipate that the town of Brookfield would go through such gymnastic-like efforts to throw us out of the right to be an intervener. That was a very expensive fight and one that you could not see coming. And if we go into the world of make-believe and say, hey, how did you kind of budget this? And we say, okay, well, we spent $29,000 in the entire year prior on the town of Brookfield. How in the world could we possibly have predicted we would now spend $131,000 in the following year? I mean, nobody would have made that leap, in my opinion, reasonably. So we did go over, and we're over 103,000, and I find it kind of interesting that if we kind of looked at the 29,000 number, when we pulled it out of the 131,000, see that we're pretty much on track with our legal expenses. There's $30,000, and well, geez, that's exactly what we spent the year before. So it wasn't something that we didn't consider, but we certainly, and again, I'll speak just for myself, everybody else has a microphone here, I didn't consider in any way that we would find ourselves with an additional $100,000 in legal costs to defend our land, defend our tax base against the town of Brookfield. So that there is a reveal there for you, and that was an unexpected cost. That happens. So I think that that's where you look at those legal fees and kind of reconcile that out.
Thanks, Joe. Mr. Fisher?
Regarding the issue of legal fees, I have a couple of different perspectives. The money that's been spent has been spent. I mean, that's a simple reality. I think there are some legitimate issues or concerns from my perspective as to whether the money was spent judiciously. We have, to be sure, some fights that I personally think are good fights. I think the town of Brookfield fight is a good fight. I'm concerned about the amount of money we spent. Big picture, I'm concerned, I mean, this past year we used 7 attorneys. The town of Waukesha, I think there was a lot of duplication of effort. I think a lot of inefficiency, which drives up the cost. I'm particularly concerned about the way we retain attorneys to provide legal services for the town. The snow plowing lawsuit, which was initiated before I took a seat on this board, ended up costing us $297,500 in a settlement fee, and we spent over $100,000 on that in legal fees. I think, leaving even aside the issue of whether that was smart to file a lawsuit with which I disagree, a do-over on that or reconsideration would say retain someone on a contingency basis if we're going to get involved in a fight like that. All of the retainages we do for all these attorneys are hourly based work. Read our ordinances. There are specific provisions in there that include different methods by which to engage for legal services, including a salary, basically annual or monthly salary. That's the way historically, to my understanding, the town had budgeted and contracted for legal services. Now, to be sure, that would cover general matters. When we get involved in special situations such as litigation, that would not reasonably be anticipated be included in that way. But I would say moving forward, our town would be very, very well served to seriously consider engaging legal services on a salary basis, because at this point in time it's just hourly based, and I think there's an awful lot of unnecessary time that's spent that runs up these tremendous prices for legal expenses. So that's something I really think we need to take a look at in the future. Thank you.
Why don't you share with us, Mr. Fisher, which of those expenses you feel shouldn't have been spent?
Okay,
You've made some pretty broad
all right, well,
statements.
I will give an example then, if you want to know that. On the Walgreens and Aldi's matter, last spring that was addressed here without autopsying what happened. Basically, Supervisor Bansky went to 2 attorneys at O'Neill, Cannon, Holman, Young, and Lang, who I think we've never even worked for, and ran up a over $6,000 bill without any kind of authorization. We didn't get anything that was worth a dime for doing that. So that's a concern that I've got. Unauthorized, unnecessary expense, and that ends up being a big bunch of money. So there's an example for you.
That's a terrific example, and I'm really glad you brought up that particular item.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to do so.
The reason that happened is because you, Mr. Fisher, would not accept the recommendation of our town attorney, Hector De La Mora, when he indicated that we needed to provide a document regarding a certified survey map that was reaching 90 days in submission to us. You argued that point. You achieved your goal that night into not having that particular document taken care of. And it's true, Mr. Bansky and I were very, very concerned about that particular matter. So we did some investigation of our own, the 2 of us, into our ordinances. And our ordinances found that we did indeed need to provide, the ordinance and statutes did reveal that we absolutely needed to provide notice to the particular petitioner on the CSM. And what happens is if it's submitted and it's not acted upon in some way within 90 days, it becomes automatically approved. Automatically approved. And that was what Mr. De La Mora was trying to protect us from. And we had worked with the firm of Cannon O'Neill historically. And we were able to make sure that we weren't in a significant problem there. And you're right, it shouldn't have happened that way. And I'm sorry that it had to happen that way, but the town needs to be protected. And when people continue to not take advice from our council, it creates more duplication of effort. And some of that is the responsibility of those who seem to argue each and every point in this, rather than just taking the advice of counsel.
May I respond?
I don't think we need to have a debate, but is that's
I'll give a brief
your statement of
response.
fact? My
It
statement
was
of
a
fact.
botched up mess that you and Supervisor Vansky and Attorney De La Mora botched up. And it cost $6,000 that nobody authorized to try to fix it, and it didn't get fixed. So that's my statement.
Well, it did get fixed because the CSM was not approved. We were able to send out the document that needed to be sent out. It just cost us $6,000 more than it should have. So that was an expense that should not have happened, that did. And part of that is because we need to accept the recommendations of the professionals that we hire and have respect for the professionals that we hire because they're all capable people. And ultimately, they're looking out to protect the town taxpayers. So the statements that you made about duplication of services, I have no idea where you're coming from on that. I think our legal team has been excellent. You have been, as has everybody here at the board, been aware and approved any and all legal expenses that the town has spent, other than perhaps the $6,000. In any retaining of attorneys has also taken place through resolution. And so all of us were involved in retaining an attorney, in deciding who was going to represent us for any matter. And to say that we've done that poorly, I guess then would reflect on all of us because we were all involved in many of those closed sessions where we worked on that strategy and determined the best course of action. Now, it is true that we've worked with more than one attorney. We've had a tremendous challenge since we came into office in July of 2010. The initial matter that we had before us was the Lathers wells, the Lathers property and the CSM for that, and the wells that were actually put in on that land and were actually functional. And permits had been issued, and that was a real concern for many of us because we knew it meant that our water supply could be affected. We hired a specialist, Dean Lang from the firm of O'Neill Cannon, and we found him through doing research. He had done work in a similar matter in the Ladue area, had argued with the DNR, and had argued before the Supreme Court, and won, in fact, at the Wisconsin Supreme Court level for his client. And that suit that he won for that client has an impact on us. And we had that specialist who also worked with us and got that accomplished. And won that case. Those wells are now capped, and the permits were pulled. So the fact is, we have hired specialists. Yes, they're more expensive, but the overall cost for that was basically minimal, given what we achieved for a very, very reasonable cost. And I think you certainly, I liken it to doctors. I mean, you either want to get a specialist or you don't. I think we have looked at who we felt would be a specialist in any area. Attorney De La Mora is a wonderful service provider in that regard because he will be very proactive. He is very proactive with us when he feels as though there's no reason for him and his staff to start from scratch to learn an issue, but to hire somebody who's already had experience in a particular situation so that they can hit the ground running, and we as townspeople have the benefit of that knowledge base that someone else has gotten through other clients. I mean, I think we all want to work with people who, you know, you don't want the doctor who's having that surgery on you the first time. You want to have the guy or the gal who's done it 100 times or 1,000 times. And that's the policy that we made the decision to do as well. Same thing happened in the town of Brookfield. Yes, we had more than one person. Attorney De La Mora's firm is involved. Attorney Dean Lang's firm is involved in the litigation side of it because that's his specialty. And then we have a gentleman, Mr. Zeineman, out of Washington State. You might say, well, that's pretty weird. Why do we have somebody working from so far away? But that was somebody that was found by Doug Hofer, an associate of Mr. De La Mora, by doing research on who had the best background and knowledge base on the particular situation with the town of Brookfield and their incorporation petition. And the person that Mr. Hofer found, yes, now resides in Washington, but actually worked at the Department of Administration and was part of the team that wrote the last NIL here in the state for the town of Brookfield a number of years ago. And he's married, and his wife got a job in Washington State. He practices law there, but wrote a very involved article about some of these very issues. And because he was a specialist, we interviewed him, and we felt that he was best to do that work. So that recommendation came from Attorney DeLamora and his firm. We've been very pleased with his work. He's very efficient because he knows the law inside and out. He's written the documents, he's reviewed these particular incorporation proceedings. And so he can provide us, and he knows the area and the information. So we did make the decision proactively to use him. That was a recommendation from our attorney. So we're using people that have the knowledge base and can provide the best information to us. And I feel very, very comfortable with what we've done. There's always ways to learn more, but all of our staff people that we've utilized are very good and have all been approved by all of us.
Jamie, do you have the figure as to what we spent for Attorney Lang on the Lathers property?
All right, it is mixed because we have used both, we've used Lang on both issues. So the total amount, we have both the City of Waukesha and we have the Lathers property issue. So I'm going to call that out. I think the last time I looked, it was about $30,000. On the entire City of Waukesha so far, from start to finish, so that means from 2011 to the bills that we paid in 2013, we paid $92,000 for City of Waukesha related issues. And I believe it's about $30,000 that's specifically related to the DNR and the Lathers property.
Everything involved with the city, though, was pertaining to the Lathers property, correct?
No, because we had the water service area that we were dealing with. So we have significant dollars related to the water service area, and keep in mind that there was also a lawsuit that was started by you and your group before we got in on suing the city. So, for those permits and for those wells, so we settled that. That's been ongoing, and that's...
There was not a lawsuit started with my group per se prior to the changeover. That's what prompted the recall.
No, there was actually a suit filed before the recall election in early July, and that started some of the costs related to that, and why we had costs already in 2010 and 2011. But the everything related to the lawsuit related to the DNR and to the city, and this includes a lot of technical assistance. This includes the technical assistance from our consultant, Bruce Baker, who we hired. Bruce Baker was retired in 2011, I believe it was, from the DNR. He was originally working with the City of Waukesha as the DNR chief in DNR offices on their application. So he was very familiar. He also was one of the people that was involved in writing the compact document that's going to be used to review this application when it comes on. So we were able to hire him as a consultant. I just called him out of the blue one day, and he was enjoying his retirement and asked if he would consider being a consultant for us because he was so intimately involved in this. And so we have his work as part of this cost as well.
And what were we trying to accomplish when we hired Lang pertaining to the Lathers property in the City of Waukesha?
To close out the wells that were already in place on the Lathers site.
There were test wells on the Lathers site.
Yes.
They were not functioning wells for water for the City of Waukesha at that point.
Yeah, well, I was waving your hand because...
Whenever you're ready,
I guess I'm not sure what
They
your
were
question
not.
is.
What is the outcome of the Lathers property at this point?
Those wells are capped and the permits were pulled.
The City of Waukesha now owns that property, though, correct?
That's correct, but they have no permits and they have to start the process over. And in the meantime, because Dean Lang won his case on the Lake Beulah matter, The doctrine has changed, and there's a higher level of requirement for those permits to be issued in the future.
That would be the letter we sent to the DNR requesting they contact the town if somebody comes in for a permit. The response from the DNR was pretty simple, wasn't it?
Colleen.
I guess I'm not sure where we're going with
That
this.
was a waste of money.
What, was it a waste of
It was a
money,
waste
sir?
of money.
It was a waste of money to have the permits pulled from those wells and no longer have the wells on that property.
There's still wells there, just not pumping out of them yet.
They're capped, they have no permits to pump, they have to start from scratch. So it's as if those wells do not exist. So that's the suit that was won. That was a very important suit because at the time that we came in, those permits had already been issued and those wells were put in. And that was recognized by the previous administration as well, and that's why they started the lawsuit at that time in early July 2010. And we certainly took it from there and replaced the attorney that was working on it at the time because he didn't have a specialty in that, and he supported us in that change and then hired Attorney Lang. But this really is questions with the audience, so maybe we should get back to that. Questions from the audience? Oh, gee.
Darn right. Just getting silly.
Okay.
You people, come on. You missed out last time, you missed my talk. Let's, yeah, I know, maybe you watched it. So, you're almost all unanimous all the time. It isn't fair to come here now and pick apart your own decisions when you've been making them unanimously. You're wasting your time and you're wasting our time. Stop doing it. I went out and counted every motion last year. You missed it, but you can look it up. And almost all of them were unanimous. I think there were 9. It's online. Mr. German made the motion to oppose the incorporation of Brookfield. This was on December 27th of 11. Then, following that up in February, he made another motion to adopt a resolution reaffirming and approving. On February 7th, Bansky made the motion and German seconded it to second the Jacobson settlement. All of these passed unanimously. Which legal battle did you not vote for? Which one did you not vote to settle? You all voted to do them all. And to come in here now and say that they were botched or they were a waste of time is wasting our time. Now get down to business.
Thank you, Mr.
Can we get back to some accounting questions?
Let's have the audience ask their questions, please.
I didn't mean in any way.
You had a very good question, and I think everybody benefited by that. Don't take responsibility. Yeah, don't take responsibility. All right, what other accounting-related questions do we have? Issues related to other budgets, issues related to anything that process-related, system-related, any specific questions if you feel as though there's been anything done incorrectly or there's concern. I know that there are people who are regularly going to the DA on some of these matters and been cleared again. And it is disingenuous to have all this posturing shortly before an election.
Can we ask some accounting questions?
I'm speaking at the moment. And so, part of what we at least need to get down to today, and I take it you have a question that I think we're in the citizen comment section at this point, so we're going to have an opportunity to speak this way.
Let the citizens talk.
Well, no one got up, and so that's why I spoke. But Mary is in now. Thank you, Mary.
I'm Mary Graves of
In the microphone, please.
Oh, all I have is wondering why some of the road repairs haven't been done.
Okay.
And that's basically, I see you've tabled it to where it's going to be involved in coming in the spring
Right.
because we ran out of time to do this or what it was. But the roads are everywhere are getting bad.
That's right.
Those are particularly.
Who'd like to answer that question?
You're in charge of the public works.
I didn't hear your question.
All right, yes. Do you want?
Well,
I struggle to find a meaningful way to respond to the comment that Angie's in charge of Public Works with regard to the budget. And I'll limit my comments just to the budget. The road repairs that you're asking about, Mary, were during the time that Everett was responsible in sole capacity, was his responsibility to secure the repairs. He set that budget. He sat with Clerk Salentine, as he did again for the 2013 budget, and set those amounts in place. He determined how much for the crack sealing, determined how much for the ditching, all of it. And we supported him. The reason that I support him is because Everett has a vast knowledge of that kind of work. I don't. I don't understand, and we have asked, I'll speak for myself here, I have asked, Angie has additionally asked, I believe, as to the question of why we cannot have in the town of Waukesha a road plan that is a 10-year window. We've asked that now 2 years in a row. The reason we have asked that is my opinion, that we form the work that we intend on getting done too late in the season as to get competitive bids from multiple contractors and execute on those bids. Both years, this year and last year, we had issues with regard to warranties on some of the work due to temperature issues, when they could get done. And I'm just going to say this, I don't know anything about when a warranty goes void on road pavement, why it goes void, the temperature issues, all that stuff. Everett is, I would say, extremely knowledgeable of that stuff, and that is why we allowed him to handle it. I guess I would say that instead of deferring to Angie to explain why road work wasn't done, I think you should answer.
well, warranties, Joe, go for 1 year. I'm not aware of any issues.
Did you use your microphone?
I'm not aware of any issues with roads. And I have bids here that were turned in, and if you were supporting me, the road work would have gotten done.
I see those bids.
You have those.
Can I just see them?
You have those. Your stamp date right here, October 24th. They were received at the town hall.
What kind of bids are those?
Jamie sent out bids early, and there was no response other than the paving. These are for concrete work and for ditching. Okay, they're on file at the town hall. I did not get support on getting this work done, Joe. Okay?
You can point to a vote about where that happened, Everett?
Just look it up, Joe.
That's an interesting way of saying, no, I can't point to a vote.
Oh, Joe, it wasn't at a vote. Angie said, no, we're not doing it. It never went to a vote. Plain and simple, there was no vote. I turned in their stamp, date stamped, and the chairwoman says, we're not doing it. No vote. So, I did my job.
Oh, good, I guess it's back to me. Sure, thanks. Well, Everett, you're kind of picking like the last horse in the race, right? There was a little bit of ditching work to be done and a little bit of concrete work to be done.
Not a little bit of ditching.
But it was too late in the season, and your own DPW staff was very concerned about it being done so late. And I believe the dates you were indicating on there were October.
My
And we had-
DPW staff was off the entire summer with wrist surgery.
Okay.
Correct.
The point is that ditching work would have been done by contractors, too late in the season for restoration, too great. And we talked about that at the time. The issue comes in, and Mr. Vansky alluded to it, and he's being very polite about it, is that we don't have a road plan. When we first started budgeting, we asked you, because of your expertise, to develop a road plan. You basically told us there could be no such thing done, it doesn't make any sense. Other communities do it, we still believe in it, and the plan is to move forward and have a road plan for the coming season. And we need to do the work in March and April. So when certain things weren't done, including the crack filling, yeah, I learned how to do some crack filling review and spoke with the crack filling people, and they will actually come out for free in spring, along with some of the paving people, and do a full review of the roads and provide a list and a budget that they can provide us, and they then coordinate the crack filling with the seal coating, so that when those crews work together from the different companies, they can do it as efficiently as possible because they come to an area. I was told that our cost is always higher than it needs to be because we don't coordinate and we don't do it early in the season, and so then they scramble to get it done for us, and they have to bring crews over especially for us, and all of that adds to the cost. So there is a process by which we should be doing it, and I look forward to us working together to do that in the coming year so that we can be more proactive on our road plan. So those monies, to answer the question, are because work was not done this past year, needs to be done. And we it should be a greater amount because I don't think we've done as much road work as we need to. It all goes back to planning for capital improvements. And so those dollars and the recommendation on the draft budget is to move those dollars to this year, 2013, so that they can be used. Pardon me?
May I finish?
Oh, I didn't realize you weren't finished.
Now, Mary brought up a good point. She said the roads are terrible everywhere. What roads would you have preferred be on the road program this year?
Now, had we had a true road plan, we would have identified those early and rated and ranked them, and that's what the individuals that do this work, the competitive bids that they do, will help us do that. We also use the PASER program, which we evaluate our roads every year through the state. We also need to determine when we do crack filling and when we do sealing. We don't have a good program for when we repave a road, a brand new road, to do proper crack filling in a proper time frame to save those roads appropriately. So the answer is we're really going to have to start and evaluate all the roads, determine a real plan of how we preserve our roads, and not just do what's the worst, but also do some preventative work. And I think there should be more dollars spent on our roads on a preventative, proactive basis so they don't get as bad as they are.
Well, the TASER program last year, we wanted to review Springdale. That had been done 2 years previously, so that's your TASER program.
No, it's not a
They sit in an
TASER.
office on a computer, they don't look at the roads.
It's not a TASER program, it's the PASER program, P-A-S-E-R. And the PASER program doesn't make any choices on roads. Our engineer, Chris Janelli, when the work has been done, when you've done road repair of any kind, that information goes to Chris, and Chris sends it on to the state.
Correct.
And that's how the roads are rated. So there are road aids, and the town makes the decision as to what roads should be improved. And historically, from looking in the archives, it looks as though when there were 3 board members that all 3 of you would go out. I don't know if you went out together or independently, but everybody at least would have a section of the town, and they would drive the roads, and they would come back early in the year, and they would identify what roads needed to be done, and you must have negotiated at some point in time as to what those roads were going to be. But it was an every year kind of thing. There didn't seem to be any kind of assessment on what would be done in the future or planning for the future. So I don't know what changed. It seems as though at some point something changed with you kind of taking over the road program. But I think there's other ways of doing it, and I think it would be good for us to explore a more proactive approach.
Well, the town of Waukesha has roads that there is no base on.
That's correct. That's correct. But I don't think we're really arguing that tonight, are we?
Well, it's part of the budget.
Planning for capital improvements needs to be part of the budget, yes, and planning for those large expenditures. I think, what was the quote on Milky Way, $1.5 million if it were to be done at the time? I mean, very, very large numbers if we were really to repave, and that's why it's so important that when we do a repaving, that we do the crack filling early on, as soon as those cracks appear, so that we keep the water from getting underneath that pavement, and we preserve those roads. And we haven't been doing a good job of that. I learned that in working with the crack filling people this year, and them giving me a short tour of how to evaluate a road and how to preserve a road. Very interesting, and crack filling is a relatively inexpensive process, and I think would be a huge benefit to us to improve that. There was an increase in this year's budget in order to have more crack filling so that we could indeed preserve the roads that our money's going into. But I think we need to get back to questions. Did that answer your question, Mary?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other questions? Ms. Padgett, you were on your way up.
My name is Betty Padgett, South 57, West 22641, Town of Waukesha. I am dismayed to see the lack of courtesy between Mr. German and Mr. Bansky. I heard Mr. Bansky politely ask to see a piece of paper that the gentleman sitting less than 3 feet from him was holding and talking about. Twice he asked him very politely, and twice he was told to go look it up in some record someplace. This does not give the town people an accurate assessment of what was on that paper, the dates that were on that paper, or the person responsible for the paper. Thank you.
You're more than welcome to view it, but if I gave it to Mr. Bansky, I would not get it back.
I find that difficult to believe.
You're welcome to view it.
Name and address for the clerk.
If you don't give it back,
Name and address for the clerk.
Colette Krzyzanowski, West 254, South 4360, in Oakley, Town of Waukesha.
No, we got it.
Okay.
We got it wrong once, we weren't gonna do that, yeah.
Anyway, I just want to get back to what we're discussing is this draft of the resolution for the amended 2012 budget expenditures.
Well, not exactly, but that's going to be the result of perhaps our
Okay.
discussion. This is really open to any and all questions, but certainly
Okay.
questions on that are.
Well, I have questions on this. So, if I'm reading this paper correctly, the town for 2012 was over budget in revenues by $112,500. Then they had $157,387 in different areas that were over their allotted budget. And then they had more areas that were under their allotted budget by $295,535. So there's a net underspent amount of $250,651, which is money that was budgeted but not spent. So of that money, I can see that the money for the ditching and the road repairs is going to be moved into the 2013 budget, so that work can then be done this year, hopefully. And then the balance of that money, the $126,977, is going to be moved to the future capital outlay for the town. And then underneath it says the 2012 carryover for capital outlay is $113,748. Will that 126,97 be added to the 113? So you'll have like 200 and roughly $240,000 roughly in the capital outlay budget.
Yes.
Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? Okay, and then that money will go eventually for,
That's what we're gonna discuss.
okay, so we don't have anything specific in mind, you know, where there's projects or things that are being proposed, or I don't know, it just seems like a big, I know you
A
need a
big
big
number.
chunk of money.
Yeah, the 113,748, that's the carryover. Those have all been designated by previous projects in order to get to that amount of money. It's just a carryover because those projects weren't done in 2012.
Okay.
So there's a generator project in there, there's some improvements to the town hall in there. You know, if monies have been designated, but for whatever reason the work hasn't been done, and we feel as though the work still needs to be done, then we'll carry that money forward into the next year, but it's designated for specific purchases. The 126,977, that's the result of at least this document that we've prepared. We can determine where that should be, but as you heard previously, we need to put monies aside for future road expense. There's fire department issues that need to be accounted for. There haven't been funds set aside for those items historically. And the discussion has been we should start doing that when we have the opportunity to do it. And so the budget amendment process is something that the town chair is responsible for bringing forward. So this is my, I guess, recommendation, for lack of a better word, what we've identified and some options that we're going to discuss for how we move forward.
Okay, then I just have one last question. Do we have a reserve fund also, like a prudent reserve in the case of a calamity of some sort, you know?
We have a large reserve fund. Do you have?
Yeah, your general fund has what's called unassigned fund balance. Those are essentially funds that are available for cash flow and contingencies. And that amount is 1.2 million.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's a very healthy town. Other questions? Other financial questions? Please ask a question, otherwise we're going to start bickering up here. So. Anyone else have a question? You want to do some presentation? Anything that you would like to provide?
I would just like to identify, as the audit process occurs, we come in and look at the town's books and records and assess the approvals and the processing of transactions. And then we prepare the financial statements. And the town's general fund had revenues of $2,839,000 for the year, and expenses of $2,564,000 for the year. So the revenues were greater than the expenses by $274,786. And that then results in fund balance at the end of the year of $1,691,000. And of that, $1.2 million is in that cash flow and contingencies fund called unassigned. And the balance of it is set aside for capital improvements and other restricted items. And that's about $400,000. So the town's general fund is in very strong financial position. That $1.2 million is just under 50% of your annual operating expenses. So it puts the town in very strong financial position in its general fund. And of course, just a reminder that you don't have any outstanding long-term debt. So all of your capital improvements at this point are being funded on a cash basis, and you don't have any debt that you're paying off for the acquisition of assets. The opinion that we issue on the town's financial statements is going to be what's called an unqualified opinion. It says that your financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So that's commonly referred to as a clean audit opinion, and that's what citizens and bondholders and other interested parties are looking for when they read that audit opinion.
Any questions based on that? Any questions based on when it's important to do a amendment to the budget? Anybody here interested in discussing when one does an amendment to the budget? Historically, do you have a question related to it? Oh, comedian too. Cookie, baker, and comedian. All right. Well, I have some answers, even though there's nobody's asked me about budget amendments. For some of you, you've probably read about some
Angie,
concern.
maybe you ask Renee some questions before we move to that from the board table here? Any objection about accounting things before we go to amendments?
Certainly.
Okay. Couple of questions. Thanks for coming out tonight.
You're welcome.
First of all, I guess a question just even mentioning the general fund, reserve fund, whatever that's known of by name. And I see numbers being bantered around about that. Those are numbers that are shown on the books, if you will, and maybe that's per choice of words. But do we have, and maybe you should be asking me the questions the other way, do we have some place that I have never seen an accounting of where those actual funds are and the amounts of it or whatnot? Do we have something, like I said, I asked that of anybody, that shows the balance between what's on the books and where the money actually is?
Where in, are you asking in what bank they're
Yeah,
located
where
in?
it's placed, yes. I mean, the numbers you're giving us, those are basically book numbers, are they?
They are book numbers, but they are supported by balances that are in the bank.
Okay, and I guess I would just wonder maybe, and that's not for tonight, I guess I'd simply like to see that reconciliation, if you will, just for understanding purposes.
Well, it's not really reconciliation, that would
Well,
be
choice of words.
a balance sheet. And you're welcome to have Jamie run a balance sheet at any point in time, which indicates where the funds are held
Okay.
and what counts they're in.
Okay, so maybe you could just present that at the next meeting or something like that. I'd just like to get a sense out of what that is so we could see that. So thank you for that. Question, are they, and again, these are they may not be terms of art to you, but are the books closed for 2012?
They are closed as of the end of the audit process. The books are closed.
So are they still officially open?
They are officially open until after the audit report is final.
Okay.
The audit report will be final once any budget amendment is adopted that affects those financial statements. That budget amendment will be put into the audit report, and then it'll be issued, and then the books will be final.
So basically, when, not just for this year, years past, when an audit report is finalized, we can say that's simultaneous and synonymous with the closing of the books. Is that fair in a simplistic way?
That's fair.
Okay. Then I guess a question I would have for 2012, have you identified, again, maybe poor choice of words on my behalf, but any expense accruals or placeholders or that type of thing that we are going to be carrying forward that will be reflected in the audit or whatever?
There were some items recorded as accounts payable as of in the year-end closing process. Those amounts were all recorded prior to the time the audit started.
Can you identify any of those? Are those going to be identified in the audit then, or the
They
magnitude
won't be
of them?
individually identified, but the dollar amount.
What's the magnitude of them, please?
The dollar amount is $198,394.
That's a big sum of money.
You're talking
Can you give me an
way too
idea of what that entails?
No,
That's
you're-
a lot.
Are you giving the accounts payable?
Yeah.
Okay. I know where he's going with this. That accounts payable are almost 200,000, okay? We would have paid bills or had it on an accrual basis. You're asking for what items may have been identified and approved in 2013 that were actually 2012 expenses, is that correct?
No, that's not my question.
Then what is your question?
My question is, this $198,000, that was accounts payable as of what date?
Those were invoices that were received and paid in 2013 for goods or services received on or before December 31st of 2012.
Fair enough, and I get that. My question is, what beyond that? Is there residually that anything that may be considered an accrual carried forward or a placeholder or something that at some point in time somebody may want to try to back put into 2012? Maybe poor choice of words. Do you understand that question? You don't?
Not entirely, but I am not aware of anything that, there have been
Okay.
no accruals
Okay.
other than those individual invoices recorded as accounts payable for money to be set
Okay.
aside for other purposes.
Then let me ask another way, maybe you can kind of help me. Maybe you can even walk through, and I had a bunch of questions to ask you to help me understand, and I see somebody just dropped over the shoulder, we've got this explanation, I guess, or summary of snow plowing expense. Is that something, did you prepare that?
I did.
Could you maybe walk us through it in the place, and eventually want to get to then is we've got these 2010 invoice accrual in the amount of $97,488 and two 2011 invoice accruals for $121,499 and $136,490. I'd like to, if you can explain and walk us through it, and I would like then to have you identify to me how those were accrued or what or not, because I looked at the audit for 2010, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anything that was so identified in that. So can you maybe walk us through that and eventually get to that, the answer to those questions, please?
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll try. So if we just walk through this snow plowing worksheet, during 2010, $125,970 was paid for snow plowing costs. And then in addition to that, the town received invoices for another $997,488. Those amounts were not paid, but were recorded as accounts payable. And that gave you total expenses for snow plowing for 2010 of $223,458.
So part of that was the beginning of the season, so it would have been January, February, March, and then the end.
I guess let me just jump into the question then. Not getting lost in the words, but the 97,488 from 2010. It says accrual, you're saying accounts payable or what or not. Did I miss it? I didn't see any acknowledgement of that in the 2010 audit. Did I miss it?
It is included in the accounts payable amount in the 2010 audit.
Okay, thank you.
And in expense. And then in 2011, you received services, you received an invoice for services for $121,499 and additional invoices for $136,490. Those invoices were not paid, but they were recorded as accounts payable or accruals and as expense in 2011. That next line, then, at the end of 2011, as part of the audit process, as the audit was wrapping up, the settlement occurred. And so the $57,977 negative adjustment reflects the final settlement adjustment to expense and to the accounts payable account to bring the total cost over that time period down to $297,500. Now the next two lines are related to an interim payment that the town made to the clerk of court for $176,001. And those funds were returned to the town as part of the settlement process. And then in addition to the amounts above, the town paid costs, actually wrote checks for $19,037 for snow plowing costs, and had another $10,643 of invoices that reflected services rendered in 2011 but not paid until 2012. So that brings your total snow plowing costs for 2011 to $229,692 of expense. So moving then into 2012 is where you see the refund from the clerk of court, the payment of the settlement amount of $297,000, and then the reversal of the accrual to bring those costs into agreement with the settlement process. And then you actually paid cost in 2012 of $80,337. So that was your expense for 2012. Does that help?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that together. The only question that I would have is a follow-up. Thank you for going through that. Appreciate that very much. I would just like to, and at some point here downstream, just show me how or where that was reflected as accounts payable type of things for 2010, 2011. You didn't belabor that tonight, but thank you for that explanation. If I could ask then maybe a related thing, and I think the answer is shorter and easier, but in 2012, my understanding, and maybe even Angie or something can help explain this, but if you look on page 33 of the summary that you gave us, under the item that's about a quarter of the way up from the bottom entitled crack filling, and talked about that earlier, I see that that reflects an original budget for 2012 of $30,000, final budget $30,000, amount paid or actual $30,000. My recollection, others might help me, but we had crack filling that was not done in, that was done in 2011, but maybe not intended to be playing words, but the invoice fell through the cracks, was not paid until September of this year. So did we actually pay $60,000 for crack filling this year, and some of that was pushed back to 2011, or what happened? Do you know?
Yes, I do. In 2011, when we were going through the accounts payable review in the audit process, we identified that $30,000 from 2011 was not paid. So it was recorded as an audit adjustment to record the expense of $30,000 in 2011 and to record accounts payable. Then in 2012, when you cut the check, it offsets the accounts payable account instead of doubling up of expenses.
So that was effectively pushed back to
So it was
2000.
correct. It was recorded as expense in 2007.
So the 2000, just let me finish quickly. So what's on here for, what's showing the actual for 2012 was in fact the work that was done in the fall of 2012. Is that what we're seeing on page 33?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to clarify one thing. We work on the accrual basis. So when the work is done is when we have the expense and when we need to account for the expense. So if the work is done in 2011, it's going to appear in that category in 2011, even if the check doesn't get cut until 2012. So what I see is a lot of dialogue over a lot of period of time, and a lot of people being concerned about pushing things back. We have never pushed anything back. Proper accounting, accrual accounting, you must account for it in the time frame when the good and service was received, and that's what we have done routinely.
May I ask Renee a question then? Are we, and I guess maybe the terminology, the town of Waukesha here, is this a complete, full-blown accrual-based accounting, or is it modified accrual, or whatever it is? And the issue or the concern that I've got is it basically we say when the audit is done, the books are closed if we don't have some way to account for something that comes later to be paid as an accrual or expense or something. I don't know how we push it backwards. Are we a true accrual accounting-based system here as a municipality, or is it modified accrual, or what is it?
It is technically called modified accrual. And what modified accrual means is that it's full accrual except for a couple of very specific things. If you had long-term debt, that would not be accrued, but everything else is accrued. So let's suppose that we finish the audit and the books are officially closed on March 15th. And then let's suppose that on March 20th you find an invoice that didn't get paid related to 2012. That would become expense of 2013 because the books are closed. So once that process comes to conclusion, nothing else is posted back in time to the previous year.
Which is exactly my understanding and concern, and maybe we're on the same page, but that's why, I mean, you're basically telling me there's a bright line on that. We can't go, here in June, say, and do road work that we wish we would have done on Milky Way and say, oh, let's go put that back into 2012, correct?
No, we cannot.
Thank you.
That will become a 2013 expense.
Following up on that hypothetical, which Mr. Fisher has indicated, you do work in 2013. It was planned in 2012. The books have closed. When the work is done in 2013 and it's paid, how do you, from an accounting perspective, deal with that transaction? Do you need a budget amendment?
No, you don't, because the carryover that you have in the current budget amendment creates the funding for that expense in 2013.
Hold on then, oh, help me a minute. I guess we don't have any budget amendment carryovers at this point in time, do we?
Not at this point in time.
Okay, so that's, I mean, historically, just what you said doesn't wash at all.
I'm talking about current circumstances.
I know, but we haven't done any budget amendments yet. I'm talking
Right,
about
and-
historically, we have not done budget amendments. So the Attorney De La Mora's question, I mean, that hypothetical, that doesn't wash for anything that's happened up until this point in time, true?
No, you're trying to, I don't know what you're trying to do.
No, I'm asking a question.
Look,
I'm asking a question. We did not do budget amendments in 2010 or 2011, true?
2010, a budget amendment was done. 2011, it was not.
Okay.
But that's not the basis of this question.
Well, I think it was. In 2011, if a budget amendment was not done, that's closed and it's finished, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Well,
Let's just hang on, I think I'll answer your question. If we spend money, are you aware of any, let me ask you a question, Mr. Fisher, so we can cut to the chase here. Are you aware of any dollar amounts that you feel as though, and I'll use your term, were pushed back from one year to another inappropriately?
No, I'm just asking questions and trying to get an understanding.
I know, but you're driving somewhere, right? So where's the bus going?
Hopefully this is a place where we can share some knowledge and stuff without agendas or whatever. So I appreciate Renee's responses to my question, and I get it, okay? Thank you.
I mean, the source of your questions or the direction of your questions certainly would lead someone, I believe if they're in the audience, to believe that there's someone that's perhaps pushing, please let me finish.
Didn't say anything.
Well, I can see that you're already motioning as if you're not going to be happy with my answer. But there is no such thing as pushing back to a previous year. And that's why I did ask Renee to complete the summary of snow plowing expense, and you've certainly asked questions related to that, because there's been all sorts of talk and all sorts of allegations that people are pushing things back to previous years. There is no such thing, doesn't happen, never has. So I can only speak from when we came in July of 2010, but in audit, I mean, I'm a former banker, okay? We're not pushing anything back to anywhere, but things need to be properly accounted for in the time frame that the good or service was received. And that work has been done. So I know we've had lots of people who didn't want to pay bills because they thought they were approving something inappropriately. Hopefully this discussion tonight will allow you to understand the reasons that things were put into 2012, even though they were received in 2013, because they were really, that expense was incurred because we received the good or service during the previous fiscal year and needed to be accounted for.
May I just ask if you just lower the temperature a bit, put the grassy knoll theories away. I wanted to ask Renee a couple of questions and stuff, and I appreciate her answer. This was advertised as being an open forum. I want to ask some questions so I get some answers. I have a deeper level of understanding than I had before I came here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity, respectfully ask some questions, and get some answers. So let's put all the conspiracy and grassy knoll theories away and stuff, and let's move ahead. Thank you.
Do you have more questions?
Not at this time, but I appreciate the opportunity to ask the ones that I have. Thank you.
All right, other questions? Any questions that have been developed through this discussion at the front of the room? The reason that perhaps I have a grassy knoll theory, which I guess I wouldn't have deemed it as, is because there have been concerns and questions about the timing of our entries toward the end of the year and going into the previous year, or into the current year. And we've had thorough discussions with Renee on identifying those invoices that came in during 2013 that were for goods and services that were actually purchased and or serviced or rendered in 2012. And those were clearly identified, and they were then dated 12/31/2012 to get them into the proper accounting year. Once the audit process started, that time was over. So any expense that would come in, any invoice that would come in at this point, even though perhaps we had budgeted for it in 2012, would actually go against our 2013 line item. So there is no going back at this point. Even if we had planned to do something in 2012, those books are going to be closed, and it's going to hit our 2013 budget item. And if we go forward and approve the recommendation, then the ditching and the road repairs, the $56,000 and the $67,000, would actually increase our line items in our 2013 budget by those amounts, and so we'd be able to spend those dollars as 2013 expenses in dollars. Does that help your question, Mr. DiLamora? Because you're not carrying it over.
Maybe if I could just offer one example, and yeah, we've had this discussion with concern. We had a meeting, I believe it was on Thursday, the 27th of December, at which time we considered a new item, and that was the purchase of a photocopy machine that I think is on the agenda for again tonight. And the direction the board was headed at that point in time is, gee, we really ought to buy a new photocopy machine. We're not really resolved on the recommendation yet to do it. I believe there was even some verbiage from one of the proposers that said it would have to be delivered by noon on Monday, December 31st, when we closed the office. So this was Thursday night, and there was a sentiment about, don't shake your head, please.
Well, that's
a sentiment, no, let me finish, a sentiment about the board that will pay for that out of 2012. And I expressed a concern about that because I don't think, and maybe Renee or your associate can explain that, but in terms of accrual or a cash-based thing, I don't think that's just if I had it in the back of my mind that I'm going to go buy something, I'll put it onto last year's book. So I expressed a concern about that, that should not in any way, shape, or form be brought out of 2012 monies. And we never got to it, and I think that was right. So I don't mean that unkindly in any way, don't mean to be cantankerous about that, but that's part of what prompts the discussion. You can't have basically on New Year's Eve say, gee, I think I'd like to buy something and I'll get around to it and put it on last year's books. It's just that simple. I mean, nothing more with that than that.
Okay, there was no characterization that anything was going to be delivered by noon on the 31st. But there was an opportunity to get a very good price at end of quarter for a new machine. I think it would have been a very good item for us. We, as you can see, and as we represented at the time, we have significant dollars that we underspent in a variety of categories. And had the tone and temperature of the board been different, there would have been really no issue or no reason for us not to assist the town's treasury by taking advantage of that opportunity. So yes, it is now in this year. Yes, there are dollars that we can move from 2012 to 2013. It will become a 2013 expense. We'll spend a little bit more for it, but it'll be certainly accounted for in 2013. Other questions? Questions? Comments? Mr. Durham.
One for Hector. Hector, section 3-1-4 of the town ordinances. Could you read that and give me your interpretation of that ordinance?
I don't have it before me. Do you have a
Jamie,
copy?
do you?
Why don't you just ask a question, Mr. Durham? 3- what? I'll read it. Which one?
3-1-3. I would like Hector to do that and give his interpretation.
Well, I'll be happy to read it for Hector. Would that be okay, Mr.
No, I would
Demore?
like Hector to read it.
Please, Mr. Vernon.
Please, Angie. Let me have Hector read it and give his interpretation.
Listen, don't, let's be reasonable.
I am being reasonable. Hector's
Section-
here at $150 an hour. I think it's a reasonable question. for
He is
Hector.
going to be able to consider the question as I read it. Section 3-1-3, changes in budget. The adopted budget shall not be changed after an approval of the budget except upon the recommendation of the chairperson and upon a roll call vote of 2/3 of the entire membership of the town board. Notice of such change shall,
If I may approach and give it to Hector. I
Mr.
just
Patty,
have to
please have a seat.
I will, thank
Please
you.
have a seat. Notice of such change shall be given by publication or posted within 8 days thereafter in the official town newspaper. So what's your question, Mr.
Continue
Chairman?
section 3-1-4. I would prefer Hector do it.
You know, I'm going to read it, Mr. German. Section 3-1-, do you have a copy to follow along so you know I'm reading it correctly?
Yes, I do. I was
All
going
right.
to give my copy to Hector.
Perfect. No money shall be drawn from the treasury of the town, nor shall any obligation for the expenditure of money be incurred, except in pursuance of the annual appropriation of the adopted budget, or when changed as authorized by section 3-1-3 of this chapter. At the close of each fiscal year, any unencumbered balance of any appropriation shall revert to the general fund and shall be subject to reappropriation. But appropriations may be made by the board to be paid out of the income of the current year in furtherance of improvements or other objects or works which will not be completed within such year, and any such appropriation shall continue in force until the purpose for which it was made shall have been accomplished or abandoned. Is that an accurate reading of the document?
Yes. So what would your interpretation of that be, Angie?
My interpretation?
Yes.
My interpretation is based on the opinion of Lee Turno, Assistant Legal Counsel of the Wisconsin Towns Association. This was discussed, confirmed in a meeting, public meeting. You have that document. Not quite sure what the concern or question is today. You know that those budget amendments did not need to be done, that they were done routinely in this time frame of the year, and the attorney provided that opinion to us.
Which attorney provided that opinion?
Lee Turno, Assistant Legal Counsel, Wisconsin Towns Association. We belong to the Wisconsin Towns Association, and based on our membership, we have access to their legal team, and we utilize their legal team for specific matters related to general rule. And this is a general rule. It goes under section 65.93A1, and our change in budget 3-1-3 and 3-1-4. And as you know, we discussed this with him, and he provided a very clear document as to the appropriateness of budget amendments here in the town of Waukesha and elsewhere in towns around the state.
Well, I didn't discuss it with him. You had a piece of paper. You apparently contacted him. And I followed through and went further.
Right?
And his response was, generally speaking, town ordinances are laws of the town. We're supposed to abide by the laws of the town, our own ordinances.
And we are, Mr. German. Please tell me how we're not.
Any funds at the end of the close of the budget are supposed to go to the general fund.
No.
You just
Not-
read that.
What is your
You
point?
just read that to me.
So why were you involved in lots of budget amendments prior to this board? Why did you approve those budget amendments, if that's true?
Lots of what budget amendments?
The budget amendments that the town of Waukesha did while you were a board member, Mr. German.
Any previous budget, the money went into the general fund, and we took it back out and appropriated it into the budget as to what it was used for.
Actually not. You
Yes.
approved budget amendments. You did that.
We
along with
approved
your-
budget amendments.
I don't think you understand the terms under which these guidelines appear. I mean, you
At
did
the
budget.
end of the year, any funds left over are to go where?
Wherever your budget amendments provide.
Into the general fund.
No. Not solely.
That's not what you read, Hector?
You want to answer?
No, I previously had seen that opinion, and I was then and continue to be now in agreement essentially what you have is the town ordinances tracking section 65.90 subsection 5, which basically says that in the absence of a budget amendment, there is a reversion to the general fund. But if you do have a budget amendment, it goes wherever directed. And that is my opinion.
At the end of, at what point, Hector?
It can be at any time, following the close of the prior fiscal year. There is no time limit set forth, either your adopted town ordinances or the statute itself.
It's not how I read it, Hector.
Well, you have asked me for my opinion. That is my opinion, sir.
Can I ask just a follow-up, Hector? Maybe you and Renee could comment on this, but the words there where it says at the close of each fiscal year, any unencumbered balance of any appropriation shall revert to the general fund, to the extent that the audit is not complete. I mean, on one hand, it can be said the fiscal year ends the 31st of December, correct? I mean, that's the end of our fiscal year, but to the extent that then audits are taking place and everything, we really don't know for certain the amount of that unencumbered amount of money until the audit is complete. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Thank you.
So it's also a fair statement that if a budget amendment is not done, then any unspent funds would simply go into the general fund. And if a budget amendment is done, then it would go at whatever accounts or capital accounts it would be designated for. Okay. So I guess my question to you is to you, Mr. German, what is your question?
We're waiting down the road a little bit.
Well, this is the opportunity, and people might have questions based on
My
your
question
questions.
was, according to our statute, it's supposed to go back into the general fund.
But
And we're supposed to do budget amendments as we go. And I have a letter here from Renee directing Jamie to do just that.
would that be the March letter in 2012?
March 8th, 2012.
Oh, well, see, because we're aware of our communication with the auditor. And part of our review is to determine what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. And yes, we were asking questions to be sure that in 2012 it would be properly done. But you can't do budget amendments when you haven't overspent or underspent and you haven't determined what those amounts are going to be. And that's the reason that this organization, as well as most other towns, all follow the same program. They close out their fiscal year. They find out where they're at, both under and over. They make whatever budget amendment that is necessary at that point in time before the books are closed, before the audit is complete, so that everything can be updated and we have clear information to our constituency. That budget amendment then in one document, as it's been presented for your review this evening, follows the end of the fiscal year, tracks with the audit, and then begins our fiscal year in the new year. And it's the cleanest way of doing it where everything is contained in one document and you have final numbers. There's no reason for us, and what you're driving at, of course, is the legal expense, and your feeling from previous conversations that we've overspent on legal, and therefore we are somehow, what was it, Mr. Patty, a felony because I didn't do a budget amendment. There's no such thing. And there was no reason to go further on that because we hadn't overspent overall. We did not go into the general fund for any of our expenditures. And if you've had an opportunity to review the budget amendment, you can see that we have underspent. And we have additional funds that we could either choose to put into the general fund, or, as I'm recommending, establish over discussion we've had in a period of time, into a capital improvement fund, so that we are segregating some funds for purchases in the future, and we do some planful financial accounting. In a situation, if we were in another situation, and we would have expenditures beyond our levy, beyond our income, and we were dipping into the general fund, you bet, we better be here, and we better be asking before a penny is spent. But that's not the situation that we've had for the last 2 years. We have returned money to the Treasury last year and this year, and therefore we have not had to take money from the general fund in order to cover any expenses, because we've prudently reviewed all of our bills, we've come in under budget, and so those additional legal expenses that we've had, which have been significant, were all funded because of prudent financial management. And we haven't not done work. Any monies that we didn't spend last year is not going for legal fees, they're going into next year so that we can do the work then. And that's why we haven't had an issue or a concern. Mr. Fisher?
Can I and I appreciate your comments there. I disagree with some of your characterizations, but I really don't want to comment on this more. Can I just ask where we are just structurally in the agenda right now? I mean, I think we have multiple issues. We keep kind of drifting into this budget amendment type of thing. I think that's a separate item, is it not? Just kind of asking where we're at structurally on the agenda.
Well, structurally, it's a free, the goal was to have a free-form discussion tonight where the public would be able to hear our discussion. We would hear their questions. Perhaps our discussion would also raise questions or other discussion that they'd like to have with us. We will, at a certain point in time, go to the actual budget amendment review. We are not in that phase now, but we're certainly welcome to discuss the budget amendment, and that may raise questions or answer questions that the public may have. So it's still in the free form. Any other questions, comments from the public?
3372 Marlene Lane, Town of Waukesha. In the letter that you made reference to, our district attorney was specific to no personal gain. If the people would like to refer to topic 3.1.3 and .4, and I do disagree with you, Mr. Delamora, all right? I cite your comment that you made in January, but of course, I don't have to follow the ordinances. And I believe that this is an example of it, where you're not following the town ordinance.
And when, Mr. Patty, did I make such a comment?
In January, and it seems that there's other people in the audience tonight that heard the same thing, I refer you to your own tapes.
What's the date of that comment, Mr. Patty? I'd be happy to review that.
I think it speaks for itself. I don't have to follow the ordinances.
Well,
You said it, go back in January to your own tapes.
Mr. Patty, you have taken this to the district attorney. I would think that you would have more specific information
And he
available
was
to
very
you.
specific when he said there was no personal gain. He didn't say you didn't do something illegal. He said there was no personal gain, and the statutes that I cited were not appropriate.
Mr. Patty, you've disagreed with our attorney, Delamora. Are you an attorney yourself?
I don't have to be, because I don't believe that Mr. Delamora, he said that was his interpretation.
Well, what say you of the
There are
town's...
other people and other attorneys that have had, and read it into the record, so other people can see the exact letter.
You're talking about you know, I have yet to see the actual complaint that you filed with the district attorney, but I did
Call
get...
Schimmel for it.
Well, had you had a concern, you always could have brought it directly to us, and perhaps we could have answered
It's
your
because
question.
you don't listen, Madam Chairman. You're just argumentative with everybody.
Angie, I'll answer your question. January 24th at the meeting, when I expressed concern about following the ordinances, you basically said they're 30 years old, they're antiquated, we don't need to follow them. Listen to the tape.
Is there anybody else in the audience that maybe heard that besides me?
Really? You're going to make that statement?
Listen to the tape.
When is it, Brian?
January 24th.
Here's the
What
ordinance
time?
book. This is our law. Yes, there are many that are outdated. I have never, ever said that we don't follow them. We follow them daily. That's the law
Yes,
of
you
the
did, ma'am.
land.
That same day you told me,
Mr.
when I
Addy.
questioned the minutes, you said to me the reason they were being held up is because Mr. Fisher hadn't reviewed them. He didn't even get them till the following Friday.
That's not true,
Then you
Mr.
told me
Patty.
they were verbatim, that was the reason, and you followed it up in another meeting and said, well, sometimes they're verbatim and they're not verbatim. Make up your mind, Madam Chairman, you changed your story. You said, go to your own recordings. I don't have to follow the ordinances. Hear that, people? She says she doesn't have to follow the ordinances. Those are our ordinances.
Mr. Patty, you're so far off base, I don't even know where to start.
No.
So we'll move on to other questions. Other questions from the group? Is there any other questions?
All right. Well, I think it's interesting when you ask a question and you say you didn't really mean anything by asking it. But you could ask it a lot of times, and somebody like a reporter might pick it up and say in a story, multiple times at the meeting last night, one of the supervisors asked about whatever, implying that there was something to it. But I was just asking. I mean, I really didn't mean anything by it. I mean, I just want to know, do you still beat your wife? I mean, come on. Of course there's a grassy knoll here. And I don't know what the letter says for sure from Schimmel, although I have asked for a copy. The Freeman did report. Brad Schimmel has found that the town of Waukesha chairman and clerk did nothing illegal. Don't know if it says that in the letter. That's what it said in the Freeman. And it goes on. In a letter to Patty, Schimmel said there is no need for an investigation. And it goes on.
Put in the personal gain context that was in it, Sandy. Not part of the sentence, the whole sentence.
It's all there, and nothing has been found. There have been multiple complaints. I'm not even going to read it. I have an email here from Schimmel tonight. This whole thing burdening his office as a county resident. It's silly that this town is burdening our district attorney with senseless things. And that's what he thinks too. Anyone would think that.
Have to agree with you, Sandy. All right, other questions? Glad to agree with you, Sandy. Said that wrong. Schimmel shouldn't be bothered with some of these things that are nonsensical. Anything else? Questions related to budgets, amendments? And Mr. Merrick, I see you in the room. You've made lots of comments historically, nothing tonight. You've accused me of a lot of things. This is your opportunity to ask those questions. Renee is here. I've offered her services to you in the past. Have you taken advantage of that opportunity to understand the answers to your questions? No comment whatsoever?
We just move on, please.
Are you now speaking for Mr. Merrick?
No, I'm just asking if we can move on,
Oh, I see.
please.
I'd like to have Mr. Merrick's acknowledgement that he has all of his questions answered tonight regarding budget amendments and the $1 million and the $297,500 of settlement expenses and the pushing back of numbers and the litany of things. Do you have your questions answered now satisfactorily, Mr. Merrick?
I'm not going to engage you in a petty little political game of
Okay.
Since when?
I guess that's an answer. Thank you. All right, other questions? Any other questions? Does the town board have any further questions related to open discussion? Otherwise, we're going to move on. Renee is home tonight.